In the dimly lit county auction house just outside of Missoula, Montana, time seemed to stand still. The German Shepherd lay motionless in the center of the concrete floor, his scarred body telling a story of unspoken horrors. The once proud military dog, now reduced to a shell of his former self, didn't even raise his head as sneers and whispers echoed through the room. "Not worth a dime," someone muttered. "Damaged goods," another voice added. The auctioneer's voice cracked with desperation. "Starting bid at $50? Anyone?" Laughter rippled through the crowd until a chair scraped against the floor. In the back row, a young man in a worn Marine Corps jacket stood up, his face half hidden in shadow. His voice, steady but haunted, cut through the mockery. "I'll take him." The room fell silent. No one knew it then, but this moment would change everything. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Ethan Walker had seen his share of broken things. At 34, his calloused hands and distant gaze spoke of battles fought far from home. 3 years since returning from his last deployment with the Marines, he still jumped at sudden noises and woke in cold sweats. The small Montana ranch he'd inherited from his grandfather had become both his sanctuary and his prison. His daily routine never varied: coffee at dawn, tending to the few horses his grandfather had left behind, and fighting the memories that refused to fade. The local VA office called regularly, but their voices only echoed in his answering machine. The medications they prescribed gathered dust in his bathroom cabinet. That morning he hadn't planned on attending the county auction, but something in the local paper's classified section had caught his eye. Former military dog, aggressive, no training possible, final auction before euthanasia. 6 lines of text that made his hands shake with a rage he hadn't felt since Afghanistan. The German Shepherd's story was written in his scars. Military dogs were supposed to be treated as heroes, retired with dignity. This one's ribs showed through his dull coat, and old wounds spoke of something far darker than honorable service. The auction house's fluorescent lights revealed marks that could only have come from systematic abuse. The dog's eyes, though they were what struck Ethan hardest. He recognized that vacant stare, the same one that greeted him in the mirror every morning. It was the look of someone who had seen too much, been asked to do too much, and finally broken under the weight of it all. Claire Thompson, the local veterinarian who'd been quietly monitoring the dog's case, stood in the corner. Her attempts to intervene had been blocked by bureaucracy and military paperwork she couldn't access. She watched Ethan with a mixture of hope and concern, wondering if this broken soldier could possibly help this broken dog, or if they would only shatter each other further. The paperwork took less than 15 minutes. No questions asked, no background check required. Just $200 and a liability waiver that Ethan signed without reading. The ease of it all made his stomach turn. A military service dog, sold off like used furniture. "He's all yours," the auctioneer said, handing over a worn leather leash, "though I'd recommend a muzzle. He's been unpredictable." Ethan approached the German Shepherd slowly, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. The dog remained motionless, but Ethan noticed the subtle tensing of muscles, the slightly flattened ears. He'd seen that look before in the eyes of soldiers preparing for an attack. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, crouching down 6 feet away. "I'm Ethan. I'm not going to hurt you." The dog's eyes flickered toward him, a brief flash of cognizance in their dull depths. Ethan stayed perfectly still, remembering his training with military canines. Never approach head-on. Never make sudden movements. Never show fear. Claire Thompson, the veterinarian, stepped forward. "His records are incomplete," she said quietly. "But he's been here 3 weeks. Won't let anyone touch him. Barely eats." Ethan nodded, keeping his eyes on the dog. "What's his name?" "They've been calling him Zero. Because that's what he's worth to them." The bitterness in Claire's voice was unmistakable. "That's not your name anymore," Ethan said to the dog. "We'll find you a better one." The next moment happened so fast that later neither Claire nor the lingering auction staff could agree on exactly what occurred. The German Shepherd lunged, teeth bared, a blur of motion aimed directly at Ethan's throat. But instead of jumping back, Ethan remained perfectly still. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or a shared understanding of pain. The dog's jaws stopped an inch from Ethan's neck. Hot breath mingled with the scent of fear and aggression. Then slowly the shepherd backed away, confusion replacing the rage in his eyes. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "He should be put down. He's too dangerous." "No," Ethan said firmly, standing up. "He's coming home with me." Getting the dog into his truck proved to be another battle. The shepherd refused to move, his body rigid with fear. Ethan didn't push, didn't pull, he simply sat on the concrete floor, talking quietly about his ranch, about the open spaces and quiet mornings. An hour passed. Then 2. Mr. Walker, the auctioneer, called. "We're closing up. If you can't handle him." "We'll leave when he's ready," Ethan replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Not before. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the auction house windows, the German shepherd took his first tentative step toward Ethan. Then another. By the time they reached the truck, the dog was walking beside him, not trustingly but willingly. Claire watched them drive away, the setting sun painting the Montana sky in shades of purple and gold. "Good luck," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the man or the dog. Neither she nor Ethan could have known then that this was more than just a rescue. It was the beginning of a story that would expose long-buried secrets, challenge military protocols, and ultimately show that sometimes the most profound healing comes from helping another soul find their way back to the light. The first night at the ranch tested both man and dog. Ethan had prepared the old barn, creating a safe space with fresh straw and water, but the German shepherd refused to enter. He stood in the darkness, trembling, his eyes fixed on the confined space as if it held unspeakable horrors. "All right," Ethan said quietly. "We'll do this your way." They spent that night under the stars, Ethan sitting on his porch steps, the dog maintaining a careful distance near the fence line. Neither slept. As dawn broke over the Montana mountains, Ethan noticed the shepherd hadn't touched the food he'd left out. Dr. Thompson arrived early that morning, her truck kicking up dust on the gravel drive. "How was the first night?" she asked, noting the untouched bowl and Ethan's exhausted expression. "We're adjusting," Ethan replied, his voice hoarse from hours of quiet talking to a dog that wouldn't come near him. The veterinary examination proved impossible. The moment Claire reached for her bag, the shepherd's demeanor changed dramatically. His hackles raised, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest. When she took one step forward, he backed himself against the fence, teeth bared, eyes wild with panic. "This isn't fear-aggression," Claire observed, keeping her distance. "This is trauma. Whatever they did to him involved medical equipment." Throughout the day, Ethan attempted to establish a routine. Each approach was met with either aggressive displays or complete withdrawal. The shepherd would alternate between threatening lunges and pressing himself into corners, shaking uncontrollably. By evening, exhaustion and frustration began to take their toll. The dog had refused food for over 24 hours, wouldn't let anyone near him, and showed no signs of improvement. Ethan's phone rang, Claire checking in. "Sometimes," she said gently, "if they're too far gone." "He's not too far gone," Ethan interrupted. Watching the shepherd pace along the fence line, "he's just lost. Like I was." That night, as a storm rolled in from the mountains, the true challenge began. The first crack of thunder sent the German shepherd into a blind panic. He crashed into the fence, bloodying his shoulder before bolting toward the property line. Ethan ran after him, rain soaking through his jacket, mud sucking at his boots. The shepherd's dark form disappeared and reappeared in flashes of lightning. They covered nearly 2 miles before the dog trapped himself in a drainage ditch, cornered and terrified. Looking at the trembling animal, Ethan made a decision. He sat down in the mud, rain pelting his face, and began to talk. "I know what it's like," he said softly. "When the thunder sounds like mortars. When every shadow holds a threat. When you can't trust anyone because trust got your friends killed." The shepherd's ears twitched, his eyes fixed on Ethan. "But you can't live there forever. In that place where everything hurts. Trust me, I've tried." Hours passed. The storm raged and quieted. Neither moved. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, the German shepherd took one small step toward Ethan. Then another. He didn't come close enough to touch, but something had shifted between them. They walked back to the ranch together, two broken warriors separated by species but united in their pain. It wasn't a breakthrough, not yet, but it was a beginning. A week after the storm, Claire Thompson arrived with news that would change everything. She carried a thick manila envelope, her expression grave as she sat at Ethan's kitchen table. The military finally released his record, she said, spreading out papers marked with official seals. His real name is Rex. He was deployed with the Marine Corps in Afghanistan Special Operations Command. Ethan's hands trembled as he reached for the documents. The German Shepherd, now simply called Shadow by Ethan for his habit of following at a distance, watched from his spot by the door. 3 combat tours, Claire continued, highly decorated. But then something happened. The records are heavily redacted, but there's a gap. 6 months where he just disappears from official documentation. Ethan studied the papers, his jaw tightening. These training logs, he said, pointing to a section. The timestamps. They were running him 20 hours a day. No dog can sustain that. There's more. Claire hesitated, pulling out a final document. The dates of his last deployment, they match. My last tour, Ethan finished, his voice barely a whisper. He stared at Shadow, memories flooding back. He was there. The day we lost Baker's team in Kandahar. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Shadow's ears pricked forward, as if he recognized something in Ethan's tone. For the first time, he moved closer to the table voluntarily. Someone wanted him forgotten, Claire said softly. Military dogs don't end up in civilian auctions, Ethan. Not like this. Not with their records sealed. Ethan stood abruptly, causing Shadow to retreat to his corner. Who handled him? Who was his last commander? Claire shook her head. Those pages are completely blacked out. But I have a contact at the Pentagon who's willing to help. Unofficially, of course. As they talked, neither noticed Shadow's growing agitation. It wasn't until the dog began to whine, a high-pitched sound of distress, that they turned to see him pawing at his neck. Ethan approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. For the first time, Shadow didn't back away. Under the thick fur of his neck, Ethan's fingers found something metal, a small tag that had been overlooked, embedded in the skin and grown over. Call the clinic, he told Claire. We need to see what that is. That evening, under careful sedation, Claire extracted a military identification tag from Shadow's neck. The numbers were partially worn away, but one name remained legible: Handler Major James Harrison. Ethan's face went pale. Harrison? That's impossible. He was investigated for ethics violations. Discharged 3 years ago. You know him? Everyone knew him. He ran the enhanced training program. Rumors about his methods, but nothing was ever proved. Ethan looked at Shadow, still groggy from sedation. Until now. As Shadow began to stir, his eyes found Ethan's. For the first time, there was recognition there and fear. Whatever had happened in those missing 6 months, whatever had been done to this dog, it led straight to some of the highest ranks in the military canine program. What are you going to do? Claire asked. Ethan's response was immediate: find Harrison. Whatever Shadow went through, he deserves justice. They all do. Neither of them could have known then that this decision would put both their lives at risk, or that the truth they sought would shake the very foundation of military canine programs across the country. The breakthrough came on a quiet Sunday morning, 3 weeks after discovering Shadow's military identification. Ethan had fallen asleep in his porch chair, his nightmares having kept him awake most of the night. He woke to the sound of whimpering. Shadow lay in the yard, caught in the grip of his own night terrors. His legs twitched, soft cries escaping his throat. Without thinking, Ethan began speaking in the same calm voice he'd used with traumatized soldiers in the field. You're safe now. It's just a dream. You're in Montana, on the ranch. The war is over. Shadow's eyes snapped open, but instead of his usual aggressive response to being startled, he remained still, watching Ethan with an intensity that hadn't been there before. For several long moments, neither moved. Then Shadow did something unprecedented. He walked up the porch steps and sat, maintaining a careful distance but choosing for the first time to be near. Yeah, I get 'em too, Ethan said quietly. The dreams where you're back there, where you can't save them, where everything goes wrong. As he spoke, Shadow's ears twitched, tracking every word. The dog's posture gradually relaxed, though his eyes remained alert. Ethan continued talking, sharing pieces of his own story, the ambush that had taken his team, the long nights of rehabilitation, the guilt that never quite faded. Dr. Thompson arrived later that morning for her weekly checkup and stopped short at the sight Ethan reading his morning paper on the porch, Shadow lying at the bottom of the steps. Not touching, not completely comfortable, but sharing the same space peacefully. "This is remarkable," she said softly, keeping her distance to avoid disturbing their fragile equilibrium. "What changed?" "We recognized each other," Ethan replied, not taking his eyes off the newspaper. "Sometimes that's all it takes." The rest of the day brought small but significant shifts. Shadow accepted food directly from Ethan's hand, though he still retreated to eat it. When a car backfired in the distance, instead of running, he moved closer to the porch where Ethan sat. Each action spoke of a growing trust, hard-won and tentative. That evening, as Ethan prepared Shadow's dinner, he received a call from Claire's Pentagon contact. The conversation was brief, but its impact immediate. Shadow, sensing Ethan's sudden tension, came alert. "They found Harrison," Ethan said after hanging up. "He's working for a private military contractor, training dogs for overseas security companies," his hands clenched on the counter. "Still hurting them, still getting away with it." Shadow approached, drawn by something in Ethan's voice. For the first time, he allowed Ethan to see his vulnerability, the slight tremor in his legs, the way his ears lay flat against his head at Harrison's name. "I promise you," Ethan said, kneeling down to Shadow's level, "he'll never hurt another dog. Whatever it takes, we're going to stop him." Shadow held his gaze, and in that moment their shared trauma transformed into something else, a mission, a purpose, a chance to prevent others from suffering the same fate. The German Shepherd's posture straightened, a ghost of his military bearing returning. As night fell over the ranch, Ethan made a decision. He opened the front door, leaving it wide. Shadow stood in the yard, watching. "It's your choice," Ethan said. "Inside or out. You're not a prisoner here." Minutes passed. Then, with deliberate steps, Shadow climbed the porch and entered the house. He didn't settle, remaining alert and near the exit, but he had chosen to come in, to trust, even if just a little. That night, for the first time since arriving at the ranch, both man and dog slept without nightmares. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to the ranch. Sarah Baker, widow of Lieutenant Michael Baker from Ethan's last deployment, arrived unannounced one morning. Shadow's reaction was immediate and astonishing. Instead of his usual wariness of strangers, the German Shepherd approached Sarah slowly, his tail low but not tucked. She froze on the porch, tears welling in her eyes. "That's him, isn't it?" she whispered. Mike's last letter mentioned a dog, said it saved 3 of his men before her voice trailed off. Ethan watched as Shadow gently pressed his head against Sarah's hand. The gesture was so careful, so deliberate, it took his breath away. Sarah sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. For the first time since his arrival at the ranch, Shadow accepted human touch without hesitation. "He remembers," Ethan said softly. "Military dogs never forget their people." Over coffee, Sarah shared what she knew. Her husband's last letters had mentioned concerns about the dog training program, specifically about Major Harrison's methods. Mike was gathering evidence, she explained. He said something wasn't right, that dogs were disappearing after showing signs of behavioral issues. Shadow lay at Sarah's feet as she spoke, but his ears tracked every mention of Harrison's name. The trembling had returned to his legs. "The day before the ambush," Sarah continued, "Mike sent me this." She pulled out a sealed envelope. "Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe. I never opened it." Inside the envelope, they found photographs and handwritten notes, training logs showing impossible hours, documentation of enhanced stress techniques, and most damning, records of healthy military dogs being classified as unstable after reporting injuries from training sessions. Harrison wasn't just abusive, Ethan realized, scanning the documents. He was systematically breaking dogs that could expose him, then having them eliminated from the program. Shadow stood suddenly, moving to the window. A black SUV had pulled up at the end of the ranch's long driveway. Even at this distance, the dog's reaction was unmistakable, sheer terror. "Get in the back room," Ethan told Sarah. gathering the documents. Call Claire Thompson. Tell her to bring the files. Through the window they watched two men in civilian clothes approach. Shadow's growl was different now, not defensive, but protective. He positioned himself between Ethan and the door, his military training visibly reasserting itself. When the knock came, Ethan opened the door just enough to block the view inside. The men identified themselves as private security consultants, interested in acquiring retired military dogs for overseas work. "We heard you recently obtained a German Shepherd," one said smoothly. "We'd be willing to offer substantial compensation." Behind Ethan, Shadow's growl deepened. The sound carried years of pain and fear, but also something new: defiance. "This is private property," Ethan replied calmly. "And he's not for sale." Mr. Walker, the second man, stepped forward. "Some dogs are too valuable to retire. Surely you understand." "I understand perfectly," Ethan cut him off. "I also understand that harassing a retired Marine and attempting to illegally acquire a former military asset are federal offenses. Would you like me to call JAG, or should I contact the local police first?" The men retreated, but their message was clear: this wasn't over. After they left, Ethan found Shadow in the kitchen, pressed against the cabinets, shaking violently. But when Ethan sat on the floor nearby, the dog moved closer until his body leaned against Ethan's leg. The contact was brief, but it represented something monumental. Shadow had chosen to seek comfort rather than withdraw. "They won't touch you again," Ethan promised. "Not while I'm breathing." Sarah emerged from the back room, her face pale but determined. "Mike died trying to expose this," she said. "We have to finish what he started." Looking at Shadow, who had regained his composure and now stood alert at his side, Ethan nodded. The German Shepherd's eyes were clear and focused, reflecting not just trust, but partnership. They had moved beyond victim and rescuer. Now they were a team. The threat escalated 3 days after the visit from Harrison's men. Claire Thompson arrived at the ranch before dawn, her veterinary truck kicking up dust in the early morning light. Her face was ashen as she handed Ethan a manila envelope. 3 other military dogs from Harrison's program were recently euthanized at private clinics, she said, spreading out medical reports on the kitchen table. All labeled as aggressive and untreatable, all within the last month. Shadow, who had grown comfortable enough to sleep in the kitchen, raised his head at their voices. His ears pricked forward, listening intently as they spoke. "They're cleaning house," Ethan said, examining the reports. "Eliminating evidence before we can expose them." Claire nodded grimly. "My contact at the Pentagon says Harrison's private security firm just secured a major contract. They're supplying trained dogs to military contractors worldwide. No oversight, no regulations." A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Shadow was on his feet instantly, but his stance had changed. Gone was the fearful, traumatized animal. In his place stood a military working dog, alert and ready. Through the window they saw a formal-looking man in a suit, holding up a badge. FBI Special Agent Marcus Reynolds introduced himself, his expression grave. "Mr. Walker," he said, once they were seated in the living room, "we've been investigating Major Harrison's training programs for the past year. Lieutenant Baker was our confidential informant before his death." Shadow, who had positioned himself between Ethan and the agent, studied Reynolds intently. "What we didn't know," Reynolds continued, "was that Harrison had identified the dogs who witnessed the worst abuse. He's been systematically eliminating them to cover his tracks. Your dog may be the last surviving witness." Ethan felt a cold anger settling in his chest. How many? 27 dogs in the past 3 years. All highly trained military assets, all suddenly declared unstable and eliminated. Reynolds paused, watching Shadow. "But he made a mistake with this one. He got careless." Claire spoke up from the corner. "The embedded ID tag, the one we removed." Reynolds nodded. "It contains a GPS tracker. That's how Harrison's men found you. But it might also prove he was monitoring dogs after their official discharge, a direct violation of military protocols." As they talked, Shadow's behavior shifted subtly. He moved closer to Ethan, not from fear, but as if preparing to defend. The dog's military training was resurfacing, but this time driven by loyalty rather than force. Harrison has connections, Reynolds warned. High-ranking military officials, private security firms, even some political figures. They've buried investigations before. We need concrete evidence. What about Sarah Baker's documents, Claire asked. A good start, but not enough. We need. A sharp crack echoed from outside. Shadow's reaction was instantaneous. He launched himself at Ethan, knocking him away from the window seconds before it shattered. Glass rained down where Ethan had been sitting. Reynolds drew his weapon, moving to secure the room. Claire ducked behind the kitchen counter. But it was Shadow who took command of the situation. The German Shepherd moved methodically through the house, checking each entry point, his training now fully evident. When local law enforcement arrived 20 minutes later, they found shell casings in the tree line. A professional warning shot designed to intimidate rather than harm. They're getting desperate, Reynolds said, holstering his weapon. Which means we're close to something they don't want found. That evening, after Reynolds and Claire had left, Ethan sat on the porch with Shadow. The German Shepherd remained vigilant, but now there was purpose in his watchfulness. He had transformed from a victim into a protector. You saved my life today, Ethan said quietly. Just like you saved those men in Afghanistan. Shadow turned to look at him, and in that moment, Ethan saw what Harrison had tried to destroy, not just a military asset, but a warrior spirit, unbroken despite everything. Tomorrow, Ethan continued, we start fighting back. Shadow's posture straightened, responding to the conviction in Ethan's voice. They were no longer just survivor and rescuer. They had become soldiers again, but this time in a battle of their own choosing. The transformation began in earnest the morning after the shooting. Ethan woke before dawn to find Shadow standing at attention by his bed, fully alert but calm. The German Shepherd's eyes held a new clarity, as if the previous day's events had awakened something long dormant within him. We need to train, Ethan said quietly. Not like before. Something new. Over breakfast, Agent Reynolds called with a warning. Harrison's security firm had deployed teams across 3 states, systematically visiting locations where their former dogs had been placed. 2 more animals had been humanely euthanized due to alleged behavioral issues. Dr. Thompson arrived mid-morning, carrying not just medical supplies but also training equipment. If we're going to protect him, she said, he needs to trust us completely, and we need to trust him. The rehabilitation process they designed was unlike anything in military protocols. Instead of commanding Shadow's obedience, they allowed him to set the pace. Trust had to be earned, not forced. They started with basic medical examinations. Previously, any attempt to check Shadow's injuries had triggered violent responses. Now, with Ethan sitting on the floor beside him, speaking in low, steady tones, Shadow allowed Claire to approach. His body trembled, but he didn't retreat. The physical wounds are healing well, Claire noted, gentle hands examining old scars. But watch his reaction to certain touches. They used pain as a training tool. Ethan's jaw tightened. Show me where. Over the next hour, Claire demonstrated how Shadow flinched from specific pressure points, places where shock collars had been used, where harsh corrections had left lasting trauma. Each discovery fueled Ethan's determination to expose Harrison's program. The breakthrough came during the afternoon session. Instead of standard military commands, Ethan began using simple conversation. Would you like to check the perimeter with me, he asked Shadow. The dog's ears pricked forward, considering. Then, of his own accord, he moved to Ethan's side. They walked the ranch's boundary together, Ethan pointing out potential security weaknesses, Shadow adding his own observations through subtle changes in posture and attention. It wasn't handler and animal anymore, it was 2 veterans working in tandem. Sarah Baker returned with more of her husband's documents, watching their progress with tears in her eyes. Mike would be proud, she said. This is what military working dogs were meant to be. Partners, not tools. As trust grew, so did Shadow's confidence. He began sleeping closer to Ethan's bed each night, eventually choosing to rest at the foot of it. During the day, he maintained his vigilance, but without the desperate edge of fear. He was protecting the ranch not because he was trained to, but because he had chosen it as his mission. The most significant moment came during an afternoon thunderstorm. Previously, such weather had sent Shadow into panic attacks, the thunder triggering combat memories. This time, as the first rumbles echoed across the mountains, He pressed against Ethan's leg. "It's okay," Ethan said softly. "We're safe here." Shadow looked up at him, and for the first time Ethan saw complete trust in those eyes. The dog had chosen to seek comfort rather than flee. It was a small victory, but in the world of trauma recovery, such moments were everything. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the storm pass, Claire shared news from her Pentagon contact. Harrison's company had scheduled a major demonstration for potential clients, a showcase of their enhanced training methods. "It's in 2 weeks," she said. "They're bringing in military observers, private contractors, even foreign buyers." Shadow's ears flattened at Harrison's name, but there was no trembling now. Instead, he moved closer to Ethan, his body language conveying readiness rather than fear. "That's our window," Ethan realized. "A public demonstration means witnesses. If we can expose what they're doing." "It's risky," Claire warned. "Harrison's men are still watching the ranch." And Shadow, she glanced at the German Shepherd. "Are you sure he's ready to face them?" As if in answer, Shadow stood, moving to the edge of the porch. His posture was straight, head high, every inch the military working dog he had once been. But there was something different now, a dignity that came not from training, but from healing. "He's more than ready," Ethan said quietly. "He's choosing to fight back." That night, for the first time since his arrival, Shadow initiated physical contact, resting his head briefly on Ethan's knee. The gesture was simple but profound, a soldier's way of saying, "I've got your back." The story of Shadow and Ethan began spreading through the small Montana town like wildfire. It started with Mark Wilson, the local feed store owner and Vietnam veteran, who witnessed Shadow's transformation during his weekly deliveries to the ranch. "That dog's got the look," Mark told the regulars at Wilson's feed supply. "Same look my unit's dogs had. He's not just any rescue, he's one of ours." Word traveled through the veteran community. First came James Cooper, a retired Marine K-9 handler who drove 3 hours just to see Shadow. He arrived at the ranch one morning, leaning heavily on his cane. Major Harrison Cooper said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I knew something wasn't right with his program. Lost 2 good dogs to his enhanced training methods myself. Both labeled as unstable after they started showing injuries." Shadow, who had grown protective of the ranch, observed Cooper from Ethan's side. The old handler's presence triggered no fear response. Instead, the German Shepherd recognized a kindred spirit. Dr. Thompson had arrived early that day to document Shadow's progress. She watched in amazement as Cooper sat with the dog, speaking in the particular cadence that military K-9 handlers share. Shadow's response was remarkable, alert but relaxed, showing none of his previous trauma responses. He remembers the good handlers Cooper observed, the ones who treated their dogs like partners, not equipment. Harrison tried to break that out of them, but he couldn't. Not completely. The next visitor was Patricia Martinez, whose son had served in Afghanistan with a military working dog. She brought food not for Ethan, but specifically for Shadow. Real meat, she insisted. These heroes deserved the best. Shadow accepted her offering with gentle courtesy, his manners showing through years of trauma. Patricia wiped tears from her eyes. My David would be here himself, but she didn't need to finish. They all knew the cost of war. The turning point in community involvement came when Sheriff Robert Davidson made an unofficial visit to the ranch. He'd served 20 years before joining law enforcement, and his department had its own K-9 unit. "This stops in our county," Davidson declared after hearing the full story. "Harrison's people might have connections, but they're not above local law. We'll set up patrols, keep an eye on your access road." True to his word, sheriff's vehicles began making regular passes by the ranch. Deputies would stop, chat with Ethan, and let Shadow inspect their patrol cars. The dog's confidence grew with each positive interaction. The local veterinary community rallied as well. Dr. Thompson's colleagues began offering their services, creating a network of safe clinics where Shadow could receive care without risk of interference from Harrison's organization. Even the town's children played a role. The daughter of the local school principal, 9-year-old Emma Lewis, started a Protect Our Military Dogs campaign after hearing Shadow's story. She organized a bake sale that raised over $2,000 for medical supplies and security equipment. When Emma visited the ranch with her father to deliver the funds, Shadow surprised everyone. The formerly traumatized dog approached the little girl calmly, accepting her tentative pat with dignified patience. It was the first time he'd allowed a child to touch him. "See," Emma announced proudly, "he's not scary. He's just been hurt, and now he needs friends." The community's support crystallized one Sunday afternoon when James Cooper returned, this time with a dozen other veterans. They gathered in Ethan's barn, bringing tools, supplies, and decades of collective military experience. "Harrison's demonstration is in 10 days," Cooper stated, spreading out maps on a workbench. "We've got people willing to attend, document everything. But we need to make sure Shadow is protected until then." The veterans divided into teams, each contributing their expertise. Former security specialists upgraded the ranch's perimeter. Communications experts set up monitoring systems. Medical personnel established emergency protocols. Shadow moved among them with growing confidence, no longer the broken creature from the auction. In the presence of these warriors who understood his pain, his military bearing returned fully, not from training or fear, but from a sense of belonging. As the sun set, the group gathered on Ethan's porch. Sarah Baker had brought her husband's dog tags, which now hung beside Shadow's new collar, a symbol of his true identity as a military working dog. Harrison thought he could erase what these dogs are, Cooper said, watching Shadow stand guard at the porch steps. But he forgot something important. A warrior spirit, human or canine, can be wounded, but it can't be broken. Not when there are people who remember what loyalty really means. The warning came at midnight, 5 days before Harrison's demonstration. Agent Reynolds called as Ethan and Shadow were completing their final perimeter check. "They've moved up the timeline," Reynolds said, his voice tense. "Harrison's people are mobilizing. We've intercepted communications suggesting they're planning something within the next 24 hours. Shadow, who had been scanning the tree line, suddenly froze. His ears pivoted forward, catching something in the darkness that human senses couldn't detect. Ethan immediately killed the porch lights, plunging the ranch into darkness. 3 black SUVs appeared at the far end of the access road, their headlights off. Shadow's growl was low but controlled a soldier's warning rather than a dog's threat. "They're here," Ethan told Reynolds, keeping his voice steady. "At least 6 men, maybe more." "Local police are en route," Reynolds responded. "But they're 15 minutes out. Can you?" The call cut off abruptly. Ethan's cell phone showed no signal. They'd blocked communications. Inside the house, Sarah Baker, who had been reviewing documents for the upcoming demonstration, was already moving. She activated the emergency alert system. James Cooper had installed a silent signal that would reach every veteran who had pledged to help protect Shadow. The German Shepherd remained focused on the approaching threat, but his behavior had changed dramatically from his first encounters with Harrison's men. There was no fear now, no trembling. Instead, he positioned himself strategically, using shadows and cover, just as he'd been trained to do in combat. "Like old times, buddy," Ethan whispered, and Shadow's ears twitched in acknowledgement. They had prepared for this, had known it would come to direct confrontation eventually. The first man approached the front porch, his stance military trained. "Mr. Walker," he called out softly. "Let's handle this professionally. Major Harrison simply wants his property returned. No one needs to get hurt." "Property," Ethan's voice carried clearly through the darkness. "Is that what you call the 27 dogs you've eliminated? The evidence you've been destroying?" A second figure emerged from the shadows. The voice that spoke sent Shadow into a rigid alert. Major Harrison himself had come to handle this personally. "Those dogs were damaged, Walker? Unstable? Just like that one you're harboring? They couldn't adapt to civilian life? We gave them a humane end." Shadow's growl deepened, but he held his position. His military training was fully evident now, but it was guided by choice rather than compulsion. Humane Sarah Baker stepped onto the porch, her voice shaking with controlled rage. "Like what you did to the dog that saved my husband's unit, before you marked him for elimination." Harrison's laugh was cold. "Mrs. Baker, still fighting battles your husband should have learned to avoid. How unfortunate." The sound of approaching vehicles broke the tension, but they weren't the police. 3 more CUVs appeared, but these were different. James Cooper's voice rang out from the darkness. Federal agents and local law enforcement are 4 minutes out, Harrison. Might want to rethink your position. Harrison's response was immediate and violent. Take the dog, now. His men rushed forward, but Shadow was already in motion. Years of combat training merged with newfound purpose as he engaged the first attacker, not with the desperate fury of their previous encounters, but with controlled, precise movements. Ethan moved simultaneously, his own military training syncing with Shadow's actions. They worked in perfect coordination, handler and dog becoming a single defensive unit. The veterans Cooper had brought created a defensive perimeter, their experience evident in their positioning and response. Harrison's men found themselves caught in a rapidly closing trap. "It's over," Major Cooper called out. "We've documented everything. Your training methods, the eliminated dogs, the cover-ups. It's all coming out at your demonstration." Harrison's next move shocked everyone. He pulled out a familiar training device, the same type of shock collar he'd used to break his dogs. Shadow's reaction was instantaneous but unexpected. Instead of cowering, he placed himself between Harrison and Ethan, a clear challenge in his stance. "Still think you can control him?" Ethan asked quietly. "He's not your weapon anymore. He never was. He's a soldier, and he's chosen his side." The distant wail of sirens finally broke the standoff. Harrison and his men retreated to their vehicles, but his parting words carried a clear threat. "This isn't over, Walker. That dog knows too much. And so do you." As police cars flooded the property, Shadow maintained his protective position. His eyes tracked Harrison's departure. But there was no fear in his bearing, only the steady vigilance of a warrior who had found his true purpose. The morning of Harrison's demonstration dawned cold and clear. The private training facility outside Helena sprawled across 30 acres, its modern buildings a stark contrast to the Montana wilderness surrounding it. Military observers, private contractors, and foreign representatives gathered in the viewing area, unaware of what was about to unfold. Ethan and Shadow arrived early, parking their truck behind the maintenance building as planned. Agent Reynolds had secured them access credentials through his investigation, listing Ethan as a potential client. Shadow, wearing a new tactical vest provided by James Cooper, remained perfectly composed despite being back in an environment that held so many dark memories. "Remember," Ethan said softly, adjusting his tie, "we only need 15 minutes. Just long enough for Sarah to distribute the evidence and Reynolds to identify the key players." Shadow's eyes remained fixed on the main demonstration area, where handlers were preparing dogs for the showcase. His posture shifted subtly as he recognized certain scents, other military dogs, some possibly from his own unit. Dr. Thompson's voice came through their earpiece, monitoring from a van in the parking lot. "Harrison's security team is doing perimeter sweeps. Stay in position until the demonstration begins." The facility slowly filled with spectators. Ethan recognized several high-ranking military officials, their presence indicating the scope of Harrison's influence. Sarah Baker, posing as a journalist, was already circulating through the crowd, her camera concealing a device that would transmit everything to Reynolds' team. At precisely 9 o'clock, Major Harrison took the stage. He cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, every inch the successful businessman. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried across the grounds, "today you'll witness the future of tactical canine training." As Harrison began detailing his program's success rates, Shadow's ears suddenly pricked forward. He caught a sound or scent that triggered his attention. Ethan followed the dog's gaze to a row of kennels behind the main building. "Claire," Ethan whispered into his communications device, "we need eyes on the back kennels." "Accessing security feeds now," she replied. A moment later, her voice turned urgent. "Ethan, they're moving dogs out through the back. Looks like they're eliminating evidence." Shadow was already moving, his stride purposeful but controlled. Ethan followed, trusting his partner's instincts. They reached the kennel area just as two handlers were loading a sedated German shepherd into a van. "Stand down," Ethan commanded, his military authority evident in his tone. "Federal investigation in progress." The handlers hesitated, recognizing something in Shadow's bearing that made them wary. These weren't Harrison's trained thugs, just regular handlers following orders. One of them slowly lowered his tranquilizer gun. "These dogs are scheduled for retirement," he said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Major's orders." retirement, Ethan stepped forward. Like this one, he gestured to Shadow, who stood tall beside him. Check his ID number. Look up what happened to him after Harrison labeled him retired. The younger handler's eyes widened as he looked more closely at Shadow. Wait, is that Rex? But they told us he was euthanized due to combat stress. Shadow's gaze remained fixed on the sedated dog in the van. His whole body conveyed a silent message: not again, not another one. The moment was interrupted by Harrison's voice, now much closer. Is there a problem here, gentlemen? He rounded the corner with 2 security personnel, stopping short at the sight of Shadow. For a brief moment, his composed facade cracked. Well, Harrison said, recovering quickly, I wondered when you'd make your move, Walker. Though I must admit, I expected something more dramatic. No dramatics needed, Major Ethan replied calmly. Just the truth. About the dogs you've eliminated, the evidence you've buried, the lives you've destroyed. Harrison's laugh was dismissive, but his eyes never left Shadow. And who's going to believe you? A damaged veteran with PTSD and a washout dog. Shadow's response was unexpected. Instead of showing fear or aggression, he stepped forward and sat, assuming the formal position of a military working dog. His bearing was impeccable, his training evident in every line of his body. He was living proof of everything Harrison had tried to destroy. The younger handler stepped away from the van, realization dawning on his face. Sir, he said, addressing Harrison, what exactly are we doing with these retired dogs? The question hung in the air, marking the beginning of the end for Harrison's carefully constructed empire. The confrontation behind the kennels had drawn attention. Several military observers, curious about the delay in the demonstration, made their way toward the commotion. Harrison maintained his composed exterior, but his eyes betrayed growing concern as he noted the gathering crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced smoothly, I apologize for the interruption. We're dealing with a disgruntled former client. Security will handle this matter. Agent Reynolds chose that moment to step forward, his FBI credentials displayed. Actually, Major Harrison will be handling this situation. He turned to address the assembled group. I apologize, but this demonstration is now part of an active federal investigation. Sarah Baker emerged from the crowd, no longer posing as a journalist. She carried a thick folder of documents. These are training records, she announced, her voice clear and steady. They show exactly what happens to dogs that don't meet the major standards. Harrison's security team moved to intercept her, but Shadow's presence gave them pause. The German Shepherd stood between them and Sarah, his military bearing unmistakable. Several of the foreign observers began recording with their phones. My husband, Lieutenant Michael Baker, documented everything. Sarah continued. The abuse, the cover-ups, the systematic elimination of dogs that could expose the truth. Dr. Thompson arrived with her own evidence, medical records of dogs that had passed through Harrison's program. These animals didn't fail training, she explained to the stunned audience. They were deliberately broken. When they showed signs of abuse, they were labeled unstable and eliminated. The younger handler from the kennel stepped forward. Sir, he addressed his superior officers present, we've been sedating and transporting dogs for retirement for months, but they never reached their retirement facilities. Harrison's composure finally cracked. These dogs are military assets, he snapped. Their handling is a matter of national security. You have no right to interfere with authorized training protocols. Authorized James Cooper emerged from the crowd, supported by his cane. Is this what you call authorized? He projected photos onto the demonstration area's large screen, images of training sessions that made several observers turn away in disgust. Shadow, still maintaining his formal military posture, drew every eye. His transformation from broken auction dog to proud military working dog stood as living testimony against Harrison's methods. This animal, Ethan addressed the crowd, was one of your most successful military working dogs. 3 combat tours, multiple commendations. Then he started showing signs of abuse under Major Harrison's enhanced training. He was scheduled for euthanasia before we intervened. Harrison made one final attempt to salvage the situation. That dog is unstable. Watch, he'll demonstrate it himself. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a tactical training device. The high-frequency sound it emitted had once been used to torture dogs into submission. Shadow's ears flattened, but he didn't move. Instead, he looked to Ethan, waiting for guidance. "That's the difference," Major Ethan said quietly. "He's not responding to fear anymore. He's choosing to stand his ground." Military police had arrived, summoned by the senior officers present. As they approached Harrison, he made a desperate move, pulling out a concealed weapon. "These dogs are my property," he snarled. "My program, my reputation." Shadow moved faster than anyone could follow, years of military training combining with newfound purpose. He disarmed Harrison with precision and control, demonstrating the very skills the Major had tried to destroy through fear and abuse. As Harrison was led away in handcuffs, the sedated dogs in the van were being examined by Dr. Thompson's medical team. Each one would now have a chance at rehabilitation following Shadow's path to recovery. The senior military observer, a decorated general, approached Ethan and Shadow. "We had no idea," he said gravely. "The reports we received," he paused, looking at Shadow with newfound respect. "This ends today. All of it." Sarah Baker, clutching her late husband's documents, watched as Harrison's empire crumbled. "Mike would be proud," she whispered to Shadow. "You finished what he started." As the military police secured the facility, a sharp cry pierced the morning air. One of Harrison's released dogs, still disoriented from sedation, had panicked and broken free. The German Shepherd, young and clearly traumatized, bolted toward the facility's perimeter fence, heading straight for the busy highway beyond. Without hesitation, Shadow looked to Ethan. A silent understanding passed between them. With a quick nod from his partner, Shadow sprang into action, his movements displaying years of tactical training now guided by compassion rather than fear. The pursuing handler stopped, watching in amazement as Shadow intercepted the frightened dog. Instead of using force or dominance, he positioned himself between the younger dog and the fence. His posture was calm, non-threatening, yet commanding the stance of a seasoned veteran helping a troubled comrade. Dr. Thompson observed from a safe distance. "He's using his own experience," she explained to the gathered observers. "He knows exactly what that dog is feeling." The young German Shepherd, still affected by the sedatives, showed signs of aggression born of terror, the same behavior that had once marked Shadow for elimination. But Shadow remained steady, gradually decreasing the distance between them, using small movements that conveyed safety rather than threat. "Watch carefully," Ethan told the military officials present. "This is what these dogs are capable of when treated with respect rather than force." The breakthrough came when Shadow lay down, making himself vulnerable while maintaining eye contact with the panicked dog. It was a display of trust that went against every harsh lesson Harrison's program had tried to instill. Slowly, the younger dog's posture began to change. The wild fear in his eyes dimmed, replaced by confusion, then cautious interest. Shadow waited patiently as the other dog took tentative steps forward, offering the kind of understanding that only another survivor could provide. James Cooper, leaning on his cane, spoke softly to the assembled group. "This is what we used to call battle buddy soldiers helping soldiers. These dogs never lost that instinct. Harrison just buried it under fear and pain." When the younger dog finally approached Shadow, their interaction brought tears to several observers' eyes. Shadow guided him back to the safety of Dr. Thompson's medical team, staying close as they began treatment. "That Agent Reynolds," addressed the military officials, "is the dog Harrison claimed was too dangerous to rehabilitate. The one he marked for death because it might expose his methods." The senior general stepped forward again. "Mr. Walker," he said formally, "I believe we owe both you and this remarkable animal an apology. And a debt of gratitude." Sarah Baker, who had been documenting everything, captured the moment Shadow returned to Ethan's side. The photograph would later become symbolic of the entire investigation, the proud military dog, standing tall beside his chosen partner, having just demonstrated the very qualities Harrison's program had tried to destroy. "What happens now?" one of the foreign observers asked, clearly moved by what they'd witnessed. Ethan looked at Shadow, who sat alertly at his side, emanating a quiet dignity that commanded respect. "Now," he said, "we help the others. Every dog that went through this program deserves the chance Shadow got to heal, to trust again, to choose their own path." Dr. Thompson approached with news about the rescued dogs. "They'll need extensive rehabilitation," she said, but after seeing Shadow today, she smiled at the German Shepherd. "Well, let's just say he's given us a perfect blueprint for healing." As the facility was being secured for investigation, Shadow made one final demonstration of his transformation. He approached Harrison, who was still in custody, waiting for transport. The man who had once tortured him now sat defeated, yet Shadow showed no fear or aggression. Instead, he displayed something more powerful: complete indifference. Harrison no longer held any power over him. "That's the real victory," Ethan said proudly. "Not just surviving, but moving beyond the pain, growing stronger from it." In the aftermath of Harrison's arrest, the process of transferring the rescued dogs to rehabilitation facilities began. Shadow had taken on an unofficial role as a calm presence for the other dogs, helping them adjust to their newfound freedom. However, fate had one final challenge in store. During the late-night transfer of the last group of dogs, one of Harrison's former associates breached the facility's security. In the ensuing chaos, a fire broke out in the kennel area, likely an attempt to destroy remaining evidence. Dr. Thompson's team worked rapidly to evacuate the dogs, but two young shepherds, still heavily sedated, remained trapped in the burning structure. Without hesitation, Shadow broke away from Ethan's side and rushed into the smoke-filled building. "Shadow, wait," Ethan called out, but his partner had already disappeared into the flames. The fire department was en route, but the intensity of the blaze made it clear they wouldn't arrive in time. Inside the burning kennel, Shadow located the sedated dogs. Using the skills honed through years of military service, he managed to rouse them, guiding them toward the exit. However, as they neared safety, a burning beam collapsed, separating Shadow from his charges. The two young dogs made it out, stumbling into the arms of waiting handlers. But Shadow remained trapped, the smoke growing thicker with each passing moment. Through the flames, Ethan could see his partner searching for an alternate route, refusing to give up despite the deteriorating conditions. "He's not going to make it," someone shouted. "The roof's about to collapse." Ethan prepared to enter the building himself, but James Cooper held him back. "Wait," the veteran handler said, his eyes fixed on the inferno. "Watch." In a display of the intelligence and training that had made him an exceptional military dog, Shadow had identified a weakness in the kennel's rear wall. Using his full body weight, he repeatedly struck a specific point until the damaged structure gave way, creating an escape route. When he finally emerged, his coat was singed and his breathing was labored. He collapsed just yards from the building, moments before the entire structure caved in. Dr. Thompson immediately began emergency treatment, but Shadow's condition was critical. "The smoke inhalation is severe," she reported, working to stabilize him. "And there are burns along his left side. We need to get him to a facility now." As they rushed Shadow to the emergency veterinary hospital, Ethan held his partner's head in his lap, speaking softly to him. "Don't you dare give up," he whispered. "We've come too far together." Shadow's eyes, though pained, remained fixed on Ethan, conveying the same unwavering loyalty that had defined their entire journey together. The German Shepherd had risked everything to save others from experiencing the trauma he had endured, and now his own life hung in the balance. The veterinary clinic's waiting room became a vigil as Shadow fought for his life. Ethan sat motionless, his military composure finally cracking under the weight of potential loss. His hands, still stained with soot from the fire, trembled as he stared at the emergency room doors. Dr. Thompson emerged periodically with updates, her voice professional but gentle. "He's fighting hard," she reported. "The next 24 hours will be critical. The smoke damage to his lungs is severe, and the burns are significant, but he's receiving the best possible care." Sarah Baker arrived, carrying Lieutenant Baker's old service flag. Without a word, she placed it across Ethan's shoulders. The gesture broke something inside him, and for the first time since returning from combat, Ethan Walker wept openly. "I failed him," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "Just like I failed my team in Afghanistan. I should have stopped him from going into that building." James Cooper, who had remained at the clinic, placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That's not what happened," Sonny said quietly. "Shadow made a choice. The same choice any soldier would make for their brothers in arms. You didn't fail him, you gave him back his purpose." Throughout the night, members of the veteran community filtered through the clinic. They brought coffee, food that went untouched, and most importantly, their silent understanding of what it meant to watch a brother fight for survival. Dr. Thompson found Ethan alone in the early hours of the morning, Standing at the observation window, Shadow lay still, connected to various monitors, his powerful frame now looking vulnerable under medical equipment. "You know," she said softly, "when you first brought him to the ranch, I wasn't sure either of you would survive the trauma you carried. But watching you heal each other, seeing how you gave each other a reason to keep fighting." She paused, touching Ethan's arm. "That dog isn't just fighting for himself in there. He's fighting to get back to you." The sun was rising when Shadow's condition took a turn. His vital signs began to drop, and the emergency team rushed to stabilize him. Through the window, Ethan watched helplessly as they worked to save his partner's life. In that moment, every memory flooded back: Shadow's first tentative steps toward trust, their quiet nights on the ranch, the way they had helped each other reclaim their warrior spirit. The thought of losing him now, after everything they had overcome, was unbearable. "Please," Ethan whispered, pressing his hand against the glass. "I can't do this without you, buddy. We're supposed to heal together, remember?" The response from the Montana community transformed the small veterinary clinic into a command center of support and hope. Mark Wilson from the feed store organized a schedule ensuring someone was always present, maintaining a constant vigil for both Shadow and Ethan. Dr. Thompson coordinated with veterinary specialists across the state, implementing an innovative treatment protocol for Shadow's smoke inhalation. When the costs for specialized equipment mounted, the community's response was immediate and overwhelming. Emma Lewis, the 9-year-old who had first connected with Shadow, convinced her elementary school to launch a fundraising campaign. Save Our Shadow posters appeared in shop windows throughout town, and local businesses began collecting donations. The veteran community mobilized with military precision. James Cooper contacted his network of K-9 handlers, and within hours, they received offers of assistance from military veterinarians across the country. A retired Air Force medical transport team even volunteered to fly in specialized equipment from a facility in Colorado. Sheriff Davidson stationed deputies at the clinic, ensuring Shadow's security while he remained vulnerable. "This dog protected our community," he stated firmly. "Now, it's our turn to protect him." Patricia Martinez organized a prayer vigil, bringing together people of all faiths. The clinic's parking lot filled with community members holding candles, their quiet presence a testament to how deeply Shadow's story had touched them. Sarah Baker, working with local media, shared the story of Shadow's heroism. The coverage sparked a national conversation about the treatment of military working dogs, leading to calls for improved rehabilitation programs and stronger oversight. On the third day of Shadow's hospitalization, Dr. Thompson gathered everyone in the waiting room. "The community's response has been extraordinary," she began, emotion evident in her voice. "The specialized equipment you helped obtain, the round-the-clock care you've supported, it's made a crucial difference." The breakthrough came that evening. Shadow's vital signs stabilized, and he showed the first signs of consciousness. When Ethan was finally allowed to see him, the German Shepherd's tail thumped weakly against the bed, a small but significant sign of his fighting spirit. "Look at all these people here for you, buddy," Ethan whispered, gesturing to the crowd visible through the window. "A whole town of battle buddies." Claire Thompson observed the reunion with tears in her eyes. "This is more than just a dog recovering," she told the assembled supporters. "This is proof that when a community comes together, when we refuse to give up on those who've served, remarkable healing is possible." The road to recovery would be long, but Shadow would not walk it alone. The community that had rallied around him and Ethan had demonstrated something powerful, that the bonds forged through adversity could strengthen not just individuals, but entire communities. During Shadow's recovery at the veterinary clinic, Agent Reynolds arrived with a classified military file that would change everything. The document, recently unsealed as part of the investigation into Harrison's program, contained the full details of Shadow's last combat mission. "This report was deliberately buried," Reynolds explained, laying out the documents for Ethan. "It explains why Harrison was so determined to eliminate Shadow as a witness." The mission took place in Kandahar province during Ethan's final deployment. Shadow had been assigned to Lieutenant Baker's unit for a critical reconnaissance operation. What the report revealed was that Shadow had detected signs of an ambush well before it was launched, but his handler at the time, under Harrison's direct orders, had ignored the dog's warnings. Harrison had been pushing his enhanced training methods, Reynolds continued. He wanted to prove that his aggressive conditioning produced better results than traditional handling techniques. He ordered Shadow's handler to force the dog forward, despite clear signs of distress. The report detailed how Shadow broke free from his handler's control to warn Baker's unit. The dog's actions, though against direct orders, saved numerous lives. However, this incident directly challenged Harrison's training philosophy. Shadow proved that natural instinct and proper training were more reliable than forced compliance, Reynolds explained. It threatened Harrison's entire program and the lucrative contracts that came with it. Dr. Thompson, who had been reviewing Shadow's original medical records, added another piece to the puzzle. The injuries Shadow sustained that day weren't just from the ambush. Some were inflicted afterward during what Harrison termed corrective training. As they spoke, Shadow lay recovering nearby, his eyes fixed on Ethan. The German shepherd's unwavering gaze seemed to hold a deeper meaning now, a shared understanding of sacrifice and duty. Lieutenant Baker's final report, written the day before his death, included a personal note. Shadow's actions today demonstrated the true nature of these extraordinary animals. His disobedience of flawed orders to save human lives reflects the highest principles of military service. This dog deserves commendation, not punishment. Ethan sat with this information, his hand resting gently on Shadow's head. "You were protecting them," he said softly, "just like you protected those dogs in the fire. That's who you've always been." The revelation explained so much: Shadow's initial fear of handlers, his protective instincts, and most importantly, his gradual return to his true nature under Ethan's care. He hadn't needed rehabilitation so much as liberation from the trauma of betrayal. "This changes everything," Reynolds stated. "With this evidence, we can push for a complete overhaul of military working dog programs. Shadow's story will ensure no other dog suffers the same fate." The next revelation emerged when Sarah Baker brought in her husband's personal journal. Within its pages lay the missing connection between Shadow and Ethan's final mission in Afghanistan. "Mike wrote about that day in detail," Sarah explained, her voice steady as she read from the journal. "He described how Shadow's behavior changed dramatically just before the incident. The dog became increasingly agitated, attempting to pull his handler back from a specific route. The journal entry continued to describe how Shadow had broken free from his handler, charging toward Lieutenant Baker's unit. Initially, they had interpreted it as aggression, but the dog's intent became clear moments later when the first shots rang out. Shadow wasn't just warning them, Ethan realized, reading the account. He was trying to lead them to a safer position. The same position where my team had established a fallback point. The journal confirmed that Shadow's actions had saved numerous lives that day, but at a significant cost. The dog had sustained severe injuries while shielding soldiers during the firefight. Instead of receiving commendation, however, Shadow was branded as disobedient and transferred to Harrison's enhanced training program. He was punished for saving lives, Dr. Thompson observed, reviewing the subsequent medical reports. The physical abuse began almost immediately after the incident. For Ethan, this revelation carried particular weight. His own team had been positioned to provide support that day. The alternative route Shadow had tried to indicate was the same one Ethan's unit had deemed secure. "All this time," Ethan said quietly, looking at Shadow, "I've carried the guilt of not being able to prevent those casualties. But you knew. You tried to warn them." Shadow, still recovering from his injuries from the fire, lifted his head at Ethan's voice. The bond between them took on new meaning. They weren't just two wounded warriors who had found each other. They were survivors of the same battle, connected by their shared attempt to protect their fellow soldiers. Sarah placed Lieutenant Baker's journal in Ethan's hands. "Mike's last entry was about Shadow," she said. "He wrote that some acts of courage can't be measured by human standards. That sometimes the truest form of loyalty means defying orders to do what's right." The full scope of Harrison's deception came to light during a formal military review board hearing. Agent Reynolds presented a comprehensive timeline that revealed a systematic effort to conceal the truth about the military working dog program. Documents obtained through the investigation showed that Harrison had created two separate reporting systems. The official records, presented to military oversight committees, painted a picture of successful training innovations. The reality, documented in hidden files, revealed a pattern of abuse and elimination of dogs that displayed independence or resistance. The program's reported success rate was artificially inflated, Reynolds testified. Dogs that failed to conform weren't counted as failures, they simply disappeared from the records entirely. Our investigation has identified 43 cases of healthy, trained military dogs being classified as unstable and eliminated after showing signs of resistance to Harrison's methods. Senior military officials, previously unaware of the extent of the cover-up, learned that Harrison had leveraged his connections to bypass standard oversight procedures. He had created a closed system where dogs that demonstrated natural protective instincts like Shadow's life-saving warning were viewed as threats to his methodology. Dr. Thompson presented medical evidence showing how Harrison's program had systematically broken down the dog's natural instincts and replaced them with fear-based responses. These weren't training methods, she explained. This was systematic torture designed to create complete compliance, regardless of the cost to the animal's physical and psychological well-being. The most damning evidence came from Harrison's own records. His private communications revealed a calculated effort to discredit or eliminate anyone who questioned his methods. Lieutenant Baker's death had been convenient for Harrison's purposes, allowing him to bury both the warning signs Shadow had displayed and the subsequent investigation into training practices. As the evidence mounted, several former program administrators came forward. They described how Harrison had manipulated training data, concealed injuries, and used his political connections to silence whistleblowers. The operation extended beyond just the training facility. It reached into procurement contracts, veterinary services, and even deployment decisions. The revelation of Shadow's story became the catalyst for a complete overhaul of military working dog programs. The review board recommended immediate implementation of new oversight protocols, independent veterinary monitoring, and enhanced protection for handlers who report abuse. Shadow's presence at the hearing, fully recovered and standing proudly beside Ethan, served as a powerful testament to both the resilience of these animals and the importance of proper, humane training methods. His transformation from a condemned auction dog to a symbol of reform demonstrated the true potential of military working dogs when treated with respect and understanding. 6 months after the Military Review Board hearing, the transformation at Ethan's ranch exemplified the lasting impact of Shadow's story. The modest Montana property had evolved into the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center, a pioneering facility dedicated to helping retired military working dogs and their handlers heal together. Under the guidance of Dr. Thompson and James Cooper, the center developed innovative rehabilitation protocols that emphasized natural bonding over conventional training methods. Shadow played an integral role, demonstrating remarkable intuition in helping traumatized dogs readjust to civilian life. The facility's first success story involved a Belgian Malinois named Scout, who had been scheduled for euthanasia due to severe combat stress. Shadow's patient interaction with Scout established a model for rehabilitation that combined military discipline with gentle reassurance. Within 3 months, Scout had successfully bonded with a retired Marine suffering from PTSD, and they completed their recovery journey together. Ethan's approach to rehabilitation drew from his personal experience with Shadow. These dogs don't need to be retrained, he explained to a group of military veterinarians visiting the facility. They need to be reminded of who they were before the trauma. Their core instincts, loyalty, protection, companionship remain intact. Our job is to help them trust those instincts again. The center's reputation grew within military circles. Senior officers began sending their most challenging cases to Montana, acknowledging that traditional rehabilitation methods often failed to address the complex emotional needs of combat-experienced dogs. The success rate spoke for itself. Over 90% of the dogs who completed the program successfully transitioned to civilian life. Sarah Baker became the center's outreach coordinator, sharing her husband's documented concerns about traditional training methods to help shape new protocols. Mike believed in the natural connection between handlers and their dogs, she told military officials. What we're doing here proves he was right. Perhaps the most profound transformation was in Shadow himself. The once traumatized dog now moved through the facility with quiet confidence, approaching new arrivals with a mixture of authority and gentleness that put both dogs and handlers at ease. His own scars, both physical and emotional, served as testament to the possibility of recovery. Dr. Thompson documented Shadow's methods, noting how he instinctively adjusted his approach for each dog. He demonstrates what we've long suspected, she reported to the Military Veterinary Board. These dogs possess an emotional intelligence that traditional training often suppressed. By allowing them to express this natural ability, we're seeing unprecedented success in rehabilitation. The success of the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center catalyzed substantial reforms in military working dog programs nationwide. The Department of Defense established new comprehensive guidelines for the training, deployment, and retirement of military working dogs, directly influenced by the lessons learned from Shadow's case. The Shadow Protocol, as it became known in military circles, mandated independent oversight of all training facilities. Regular psychological evaluations became mandatory, conducted by certified veterinary behaviorists who could identify signs of trauma or abuse. Most significantly, the military established a formal retirement program ensuring that service dogs received proper medical care and placement opportunities after their active duty concluded. Congressional hearings on military working dog welfare led to the passage of the Military Working Dog Protection Act. This legislation guaranteed funding for post-service care and prohibited the use of aggressive training methods. It also established a tracking system for all military working dogs, preventing cases like Shadow's from disappearing from official records. The impact extended beyond policy changes. Major military training centers revised their handling protocols, incorporating elements from the Second Chance program. The emphasis shifted from dominance-based training to building trust and understanding between handlers and their canine partners. Training success rates improved, while incidents of handler injuries and dog washouts decreased significantly. International military organizations took notice. Delegations from allied nations visited the Montana facility to study its rehabilitation methods. Shadow's story influenced working dog programs across multiple countries, leading to global reforms in military canine training and care. The financial implications proved significant as well. The military's investment in proper training and retirement care actually reduced long-term costs by extending the service life of working dogs and decreasing the need for replacement animals. The success of rehabilitated dogs in civilian service roles, including law enforcement and therapy work, demonstrated their continued value to society. Dr. Thompson's research papers on Shadow's rehabilitation methods appeared in prestigious veterinary journals, establishing a new standard for treating combat-related trauma in working dogs. Her findings highlighted the importance of addressing both physical and psychological welfare in military animals. Perhaps most importantly, the reforms helped change the military's perspective on its canine personnel. Working dogs were no longer viewed merely as equipment, but as valued service members deserving of respect and care throughout their lives. This shift in mindset led to improved handler training programs that emphasized the bond between human and canine partners. Shadow and Ethan's testimony before military committees provided compelling evidence for these changes. Their partnership demonstrated how proper support and understanding could transform both handler and dog, creating stronger, more effective working teams. 2 years after the establishment of the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center, Ethan and Shadow's legacy had grown far beyond their Montana ranch. On a crisp autumn morning, they stood together watching a new group of veterans and their canine partners arriving for rehabilitation. The facility had expanded thoughtfully, maintaining its intimate atmosphere while accommodating more pairs in need. The original barn had been renovated into a state-of-the-art training center, but Shadow's favorite spot remained the quiet corner where he and Ethan had first begun to trust each other. The program they developed became known as the Shadow Walker method, emphasizing the parallel healing of both handler and dog. Military medical professionals documented remarkable improvements in PTSD symptoms among veterans who participated in the program, while veterinary studies confirmed unprecedented success rates in rehabilitating traumatized military dogs. Shadow, now gray around the muzzle but still carrying himself with military bearing, had become an icon of resilience. His gentle guidance of new arrivals demonstrated a wisdom that transcended traditional training methods. Veterans often remarked that Shadow seemed to understand their struggles intuitively, offering silent support during difficult moments in their recovery. Sarah Baker's continued involvement ensured that her husband's legacy lived on through the program. The center's library, dedicated to Lieutenant Baker's memory, housed comprehensive resources on military working dog welfare and rehabilitation techniques. His original documentation of Harrison's program served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and moral courage. Dr. Thompson's veterinary clinic had become an integral part of the center, specializing in the unique medical needs of retired military working dogs. Her research, built upon Shadow's case, established new protocols for treating combat-related trauma in service animals, earning international recognition in veterinary medicine. The annual Shadows Run A event, bringing together military handlers, veterans, and their dogs, became a celebration of healing and hope. Participants traveled from across the country to share their stories and strengthen the bonds within their unique community. One morning, as Ethan and Shadow completed their daily perimeter walk, they encountered a young veteran struggling with his newly assigned therapy dog. Shadow, without prompting, approached them both, demonstrating the patient understanding that had become his trademark. The veteran later remarked that this quiet interaction had restored his faith in recovery. The most profound testament to their impact came through the countless letters they received from handlers and veterans whose lives had been transformed through the program. These stories, collected in the center's archives, documented a ripple effect of healing that extended far beyond the ranch's boundaries. As the sun set over the Montana mountains, Ethan and Shadow sat on their familiar porch, watching their legacy unfold. The once broken dog from the auction house had not only found his own healing but had become a guide for others on their journey to recovery. Together they had transformed a story of trauma into one of hope, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal with understanding, patience, and unwavering loyalty. In the depths of life's harshest moments, Shadow and Ethan's story reminds us that healing knows no bounds of species or time. For our generation, who witnessed the evolution of military service and the true cost of war, this tale resonates with particular poignancy. We understand what it means to carry invisible wounds, to face battles that continue long after returning home. Shadow's journey from a broken military dog to a healer of others mirrors our own experiences of resilience and redemption. Like many of us who served or watched our loved ones serve, he faced the challenge of reclaiming his identity after trauma. His transformation speaks to the power of second chances and the enduring strength of the human-animal bond. This story honors the values we hold dear: loyalty, duty, and the courage to stand up for what's right. It reminds us that our generation's commitment to service and sacrifice continues to shape positive change. And through Shadow and Ethan, we see that our experiences, even the painful ones, can become a foundation for helping others heal. Their legacy proves that it's never too late to make a difference, to find purpose, or to begin again. In their story, we recognize our own capacity for renewal and the profound impact that compassion and understanding can have on healing our deepest wounds. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.